Okay. What is this shit in my Reddit? Oh god, we have to talk about this. Oh. Case against Vaushian fascistic doomerism argument through data. Yesterday, Vaush had a good argument with liberal about a number of great points. Couldn't help to question the truth he made with some of his claims, particularly about the possibility of genocide of queer people in the near future. After reviewing the existing evidence, I've concluded that when examining the status of queer genocide through the perspective of a commonly understood model, the current evidence is inconclusive over the question of queer genocide in America, and what we're currently somewhere between stage 4 and stage 5. Wait, isn't that far enough? Want to briefly, if the alarmist rhetoric is in fact responsible for important violence rhetoric, I just want the rhetoric to be factually correct. Wait, did I say anything that was factually incorrect? I mean, 4 or 5 is pretty far along. It's happening, especially turn to a normal level of hate crime. We're in fact regressing. Alarmist tendencies. One narrative taken away. Essentially, nothing's changed 20 to 30 years. Wait, what here contradicts what I've said? I can't look through all this and like interpret the data right now, but what stage is the camps built in? The thing that I think people need to understand. Okay, so let me, just so everyone understands where I'm coming from here. Okay, you know, follow through with me here. Okay, work with me on these premises. Okay, so in 2020, the Republican Party attempted a coup. Right? Can we agree on that? Like, it didn't work, but if it had gone farther and there had been more public support and the judges and more public officials and everything, if all of them had been more in favor of what happened on Jan 6th than what did happen, if they'd had a little more power in the right places, do you think Republicans would have just backed up? They would have been like, oh, just kidding, haha, Biden really did win the election. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, historically failed coups lead to successful coups. You have a failed attempt, you consolidate power, you foster resentment in the people who feel that the failed coup should have like succeeded, and then you try again and win. You know, um, that that's been known to happen. Yeah, they're getting the practice run in. So there's been no meaningful change in the Republican Party since what happened in 2020 with regards to their anti-democratic nature. They continue to be anti-democratic. The only retraction from the great lie has been for legal reasons. You know, all the people and institutions who have backed off the idea that Trump won the election did so to avoid getting sued, but like there hasn't really been a reckoning for that. So it's reasonable to assume that they're going to keep doing this. And given the fact that there have been essentially no punishments, no consequences after the first coup attempt, which literally involved a storming of the Capitol, I think it's reasonable to assume that there probably isn't going to be a very effective set of preventative measures being done for future efforts by the Republican Party. Certainly the Democrats haven't really like escalated in the alarmist rhetoric about how close we came to losing our democracy. It doesn't seem to me very likely that Democrats are going to like suddenly get all gung-ho about defending democracy. If anything, yeah, they're like subservient, submissive, you know, lackadaisical response is kind of encouragement. Like, yeah, try it again, you know, like we're barely going to do anything about it. So given all this, and by the way, everything I've said so far, I think, is like really reasonable. Like, this isn't like a leftist perspective. This is like a pretty normal, liberal, like bog standard, regular interpretation of the facts at hand, in my opinion, you know. So given all of that, given all that information, why would I not think they're just going to do it again? What if they win? You know? Like, the kind of party that will attempt to seize power with a coup is not the type of party that will preserve democracy after they have that coup. Does that happen? Like, a political party has a coup, seizes control of the government, and then maintains democracy? Like 4 years after, they're like, we had our fun. Like, does that happen? You know? Euromaidan? Nah, in Ukraine, the leader fled. That wasn't a coup, that was an ousting. After Yanukovych fled, they followed like standard procedure for his absence. They had an interim leader and then an immediate election. It wasn't like a one party like seizing control of the government. It was protests leading one guy to flee to Russia. I think it's critically different there. Those protesters weren't trying to like seize the government, you know? And they didn't. But what was I saying? Oh, anyway, so it's reasonable to assume, right, that if they do a coup, they're probably not going to like keep democracy together afterwards, right? Like that's just a very weird thing to do. Like, yeah, we were willing to spend years subverting democracy, breaking rules, encouraging stochastic violence in order to seize power, but like, oh yeah, if you beat us in the next election, like fair game, you know? Probably not. Republicans have the Supreme Court. They're already like undoing constitutional precedent going back 50 years with Roe v. Wade. Clearly, they're not interested in maintaining like a moderate institutionalist, you know, Supreme Court position. They're going to have the court for a long time too. You know, that's going to be slanted for a while, and there's a very real possibility that they're going to have the House and the Senate. So if the Republicans, who are anti-democracy and pro-coup, who have attempted a coup, have all elements of federal government under their control, the argument that I have is that not only will they try to undo democracy effectively, because again, breaking the law as an agent of the federal government only works if other checks in the federal government stop you, you know? Like if the president does something bad, maybe the Senate or the Congress can stop them, but if the Congress is in the president's pocket and the courts are in the president's pocket, if they're all part of the same party working towards the same end, what do you think they're going to do? Do you think them breaking the law is going to matter? The law won't matter. The courts will just sign off on anything they do as constitutional. What are you going to do? And my impression is that, and I'm saying this because this is very, 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 very historically consistent. It's that if the Republicans do disassemble our democracy, if they are successful, that doesn't mean everyone in the country is just going to agree with them or get along with them. But what authoritarian governments will often do is crack down on dissent in a very performative manner to serve two functions. One, to get rid of opponents, and two, to galvanize fear and hatred within the country against a minority group to distract from and justify the power of the new authoritarian group. So what you do is you usually take advantage of a pre-existing sentiment, some social bias or bigotry that you can work off of, you know, something you can build atop, and you construct a narrative. Now, right now, the Republican Party is in a position where its advocates are openly talking about the Great Replacement theory, openly suggesting that Democrats are bringing in non-white people to change the demographics of America in order to promote anti-white bias and do other stuff like that. That's pretty far right. And right now, we already have a narrative, which is being promoted pretty much uniformly across the Republican Party, that trans people are at best mentally ill, and at worst active perpetrators in the grooming of children to make them mentally ill. Now, given the fact that the Republican Party has used fear-mongering against these minority groups as a substitute for any meaningful policy, you know, prescription, my feeling is that if they did attempt to dismantle democracy, the easiest way for them to consolidate and maintain power would be to double down on all of these elements of discrimination, to get Americans more interested in the stories they tell about those groups than they are in the dismantling of the democracy that Republicans have just conducted. Everything that I'm saying right now is in line with authoritarian takeovers around the world throughout history. This isn't like crazy lefty speculation. This isn't wild, wacky, you know, like totally out there, hyper-specific sociological analysis. This is like a pretty consistent type of thing that tends to happen with authoritarian governments, full-on authoritarian takeovers. Now, in that environment, I genuinely believe that genocide is near inevitable. Right now, I think the precursor has been set. The preceding pieces are being laid. You know, the foundations are being built. But I think everything is going to get a lot worse if the Republicans are successful in seizing control of the government. Genocide of who specifically? It could be a sort of broad attack on immigrants or racial minorities. It could be like a revamped sort of implied attack against Jewish people. It's not as though anti-Semitism is uncommon in the Republican Party, you know. It could be like an attack on liberal institutions and queer people, accusing them of being like symptoms of degeneration and weakness within the Western civilization. Yeah, keep in mind, genocide doesn't exclusively mean like everyone's being brought to Auschwitz, okay? There are far more, there's a much great, like, what Nazi Germany did is the farthest possible, like, element of a genocide. There's more to it than that. And America has perpetuated genocides before. And we, yeah, you don't even need to kill people, technically. But I hope you all understand what I'm talking about here, okay? When I talk about this, when I talk about, like, you know, they're going to kill us, whatever, what I'm talking about is we lose our democracy, and then, following that, they use the power they have to ramp up the oppression. And in so doing, that would be like their attempt to consolidate power. Now, mind you, I don't think that attempt to consolidate power would be effective in the long term. Fascist governments are self-destructive. They don't last very long. They're not very stable. They're just not. They're not good at internal operation. They're very inefficient and racked with corruption and blah, blah, blah. You know, but the fact that such a government would collapse in 5 to 10 to 20 years is not much of a, you know, much consolation to all the people who suffer up until that point. You know? Like, oh, don't worry, in 20 years it'll be all over, isn't much help to people now. So this is what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? Do people understand what I'm getting at here? Your analysis is entirely removed from considering the relative domestic material conditions in the U.S., which affect average complicity. Also, liberals have most of the cultural media power. You realize liberals had most of the cultural and media power in Germany as well. Save me your liberal indignation. I know more about the history of Nazi Germany than you based on that one comment, okay? Do not, yeah. If you are uncomfortable with what I'm saying, that's wrong. Up until what point, SDL? During the Weimar Republic? Vaush, most university students and professors were conservative or Nazi aligned in the Weimar period. The Nazis weren't even a... Okay. I'll trust you because you're saying it, SDL. From what I've read, the media was broadly, like, very opposed to what the Nazis were and what they were doing. And that's why, like, the crackdown following their, like, take the power ended up leading to a massive switch in, like, who was represented and outspoken in the media sphere. SDL is completely wrong here. That doesn't sound right to me, but I don't want to do a historical fact check. We'll have to trust, is SDL ever completely wrong? Only with prescriptions sometimes. Nazi rise also happened during the Great Depression, which can't be overlooked. I feel like a lot of people, like, are really desperate for a reason to believe that it can't happen here. I really have to ask about that. Like, why? Like, well, the Great Depression was happening back then. There have been authoritarian takeovers all over the world since then. Like what I just said, the pattern that I laid out wasn't just Nazi Germany. This happens with authoritarian governments all the time. If you, as far as I'm concerned, if you're out there outspokenly denying the possibility that this can happen because you're afraid that it might, you're complicit when it does. Morally, like, look in your heart, you know? Is that really the motivation that you want to be leading you to denying, like, the message? It's very dangerous. Haven't material conditions at least... the material conditions in America are right... I don't know if you've been paying attention to the past decade. Material conditions in America are ripe for fascist populism. I don't know if you've been, like, watching the media or, like, paying attention at all. I don't know if you're at all familiar with, like, the direction, that economic austerity and jobs being outsourced and the service economy and the gutting of the industrial center and of stagnating wages. I don't know if like you've been paying attention to any of that, but there is a reason why radical populism has grown more popular on both sides in the past like few decades, you know. A lot of academics were Nazi sympathetic once they seemed to be winning. Rees, Schmidt, Heidegger, they definitely weren't liberal, but they weren't Nazi sympathetics per se. I was thinking more the media than the academia. But I was more interested in that. But anyway, I can look more into that. Anyway, the material conditions, like I don't think that anything that I've said relating to the threat of an authoritarian takeover, I don't think any of it is wild speculation, and it's certainly not just like this crude one-to-one inference from what happened with Nazi Germany. Vaush, I find it hard to believe with the amount of progress we've made in the past 10 to 20 years we could become authoritarian. With respect, people like you infuriate me. The Weimar Republic was one of the most progressive places in the history of all of Europe before Nazis took over. You can't do this. You can't let fear rule your, like people say a fearmonger. I'm just talking about what authoritarian takeovers look like. You're unwilling to acknowledge this. Fine, we'll do an entire stream on how Nazis came to power in Germany if you would like. Fine, we can do that. Certainly there are better YouTube videos out there than that, more research than anything I could do on the fly for a live stream, but it seems worthwhile. Yeah, the Weimar Republic, like, people would go to Berlin to, like, cross-dress and have, like, gay couples and shit, like, during the Weimar Republic. Like, it was very, you can't, it can happen here. It can happen here. Vaush, but Germany just lost World War I getting schlumped. Austin 4D7, you're completely right. I had never realized it can't happen here, because what happened with the Nazis happened in Germany, and this is America. Two totally different situations. Stop just listing differences in things. It's not relevant. I wasn't even talking about Nazi Germany specifically. I was talking about authoritarianism broadly. Like, yeah, Vaush, the most important question is, what should we do to stop it? Not just, yeah, it's happening. You know what I think about that. Vaush, genocide. I absolutely think the Republicans will try to tear down democratic institutions, but the U.S. had much stronger white nationalist and eugenicist movements in the past, especially the 1877 to 1932 period. The second... Yeah, soaked and left, but we didn't have the anti-authoritarian like coup thing. What I'm talking about is like what follows the deconstruction of our democracy. Certainly there have been anti-democratic political figures, even to an extent presidents, but you know, not in the fashion we're seeing now. Second Ku Klux Klan had about 6 million members in 1924. That's 5% of the 114 million people in the U.S. back then. I feel like we're latching on to like signifiers of older eras, you know. Well, things are more progressive today, you know. Nike, Colin Kaepernick, trans people, Steven Universe, Cartoon Network. We don't have the Klan anymore, not really in a meaningful sense. That's something. Everything can backslide. Okay, we've got slave markets in Libya. All right, you know, people. It's this insistence that we're at the end of history. Like history is some kind of ratchet where once you move forward a certain distance, you can't backslide that far. But history is full of examples of civilizations crumbling, of empires falling to pieces, of countries falling to civil war and emerging authoritarian dictatorships. This happens, and we're not special. America has relatively strong institutions compared to a lot of countries, but no institutions are invulnerable. And we've already seen ours fail, frankly. The fact that McConnell held up a Senate confirmation for an Obama Supreme Court appointee, right there, that was like democracy broken right there. Like full on. Like Republicans, when they control the Senate, will simply prevent the president from, if they're Democrat, from doing their job. You know, very, very clear. As far as I'm concerned, you could have put the entire Republican Party out to sea right then, but no, they persist. And then we have the coup attempt. And, you know, what consequences have they suffered for this? None. None. There have been no consequences suffered. Not even social consequences, not really. The feds rounded up a few people. I mean, what is that going to do? You know, the feds round up, and by the way, do you remember what was it? Marjorie Taylor Greene was screaming about how unfair it was that the January 6 incarcerated people were being held in jail. Do you remember that? Like that's the legacy of the Republican Party. Not only do they not retract, not deny, they defend the people arrested for participating in the coup. I mean, that's where we're at right now. Can we get a stream on what we should do? Quoteth. You know what I think you should do. Learn your neighborhood, buy guns, learn how to use them, uh, live with the awareness that the democracy that we live in is a potentially a temporary fixture. Mental self-defense. You should repeat that often. I like how there are so many liberals in my community that the statement, buy a gun and learn how to use it, is some kind of like pseudo-terroristic virtue signal to some of you. You know what I mean? Like, I can't believe how radical, like, I can't believe what we have very strong evidence that there's going to be like an actual attempt at ending our democracy soon, because one of our political parties, which seems to have the upper hand in several senses in the upcoming elections, has openly said effectively they don't care about democracy. But the statement, maybe get ready, stockpile some food, and know how to use a gun, this is the radical one. I'm the radical. Isn't this the exact opposite of what you were saying a few months ago? No, I've been saying this for years. Vaush, nobody is saying it couldn't happen here. We're just saying it wouldn't right now based on the current state of America. I'm not saying it'll happen today. I'm saying it could happen in 2024 or maybe 2028. I'm not giving you a timeline. I'm telling you that unless the Democratic Party is willing to do what needs to be done, it is inevitable. Maybe things could change. Maybe the Republican Party could just arbitrarily decide with no external motivation to not be authoritarian. That would be lovely. That seems to me like magical thinking to hope for that, though. It's possible. Not impossible. It could happen. I don't think it will. And if it doesn't happen, then eventually they're going to win. And if they win, they're probably going to try to make it easier for them to win again, if they even need to win again. That it's full-on civil war, though? No, it's not about civil war. That's not how it works. Coup attempts don't lead to civil wars necessarily. There are different ways of this panning out. We also benefit from the fact that we have a federalist system, which means that military power and authority is split between a wide range of institutions. I cannot even begin to speculate, Leader Rogers. Is it even possible to save America at that point? Links. It is always possible to make the world better than it is without your intervention. It will. That is fundamental. There will never be a situation where that is not the case. Your efforts can always help. The Weimar Republic was federal too, not in the way ours was, or is, not in the way ours is. Kind of frustrating how seemingly terrified a lot of lefties and libs are of guns and the concept of having to fight. Listen, it's fine to be terrified of stuff like this or of negatives in the future. All I'm saying is you make the likelihood of it happening greater by not acknowledging it. The greatest chance we have of preventing all of this from happening is by waking liberals and independents in this country up to the point that they treat Republicans like the threats they are. The Republican Party is a criminal organization. Its leaders should be arrested and tried quickly. Every one of them. All of them. I'm not joking. It is a criminal institution. If they're found not guilty, fine, let them live their lives. That's what the system's for. That is how they should be treated. They attempted a coup. The party backed a coup attempt. There's no room here. There's no shoulder room here. But we can't do that unless far more people in this country are aware of the threat Republicans pose, aware of what might happen if they seize power again. And you increase the likelihood of them being able to seize that power if you allow liberals and apolitical people to persist in their delusional belief that Republicans are, playing the same game Democrats are. You can't let them continue to believe that, because that makes them weak. It's why I talk about this. I'm not expecting you all to